Kick us off now. My name's Gavin Starks. I'm the founder of Icebreaker One. We're a non-profit dedicated to making data work harder to deliver net zero. So that's me. But to kick us off, I'd like to start with a poll to find out who we've got in the room. So if I can ask now, we start that question. So here the options are you a business looking for a carbon reporting solution? A business who's used a carbon reporting solution, a vendor, or other. And if you're other, I'd encourage you to put what the other is in the chat as well. So we'll run this for a couple of minutes just to orient ourselves. So now we can see a few businesses looking for carbon reporting solutions. Got 5 of them so far. 4 others. Please do say your other in the chat. Okay, I think we've got brilliant journalist, fantastic. That's we definitely need more visibility of what's going on in the world here as well. So I'll close the poll in just a minute. Okay, let's end the poll there. And I think we can share the results of that. So yeah, we've got a good number of people looking for solutions. So very much keen to hear your questions as we go through this as well. So let's move on to the next slide and just what our aims and agenda are for today. So first and foremost, we will be sharing, and I'll pass over to Lewis in a moment, sharing what we've learned. We'd love to get your feedback on any things, points of validation or counterfactuals, if you've had different experiences. We're really keen to disseminate this work as widely as possible. British Business Bank have funded this work, and we're very keen to reach as many of the SME community in particular as possible. This is a tool that is meant to be helping them and something that we want to ideally maintain on an ongoing basis. And to that end, we're starting to build and connect the community of practitioners. Icebreaker One's a non-profit for many reasons. One of them is we need to be neutral in the market here, and we put a lot of focus on the development of communities of practice. Excuse me, communities of practice. And Julia Higginbottom there, who's on the chat, is heading up a lot of our community connection efforts, and very keen to connect with as many as possible. So the agenda for today is now we'll pass over to Lewis in a moment, but just to set the scene a little bit, if we skip forward a couple of slides there, we know who I am. So just in terms of the UK landscape, most businesses in the UK are SMEs, huge economic value to the economy, and the majority of people work in the SME community. Next slide. But when we break that down, over 4 million are sole traders. So what we're seeing is as carbon reporting becomes mandatory at the larger company end, so the financial institutions, large corporates, etc., they're then turning around and asking their supply chain what their carbon footprint is. Now, that's extremely challenging for a sole trader. It's extremely challenging if you're a small business with fewer than 10 employees. And so for the vast majority of SMEs, this is a really tough challenge that's coming. And we're keen to hear as well, if you've been asked by your customers to start filling in questionnaires and so on, please do let us know. Because it's quite important, if we go to the next slide, over half of UK emissions comes from the SME community. That's half of UK business emissions, I should say. And a very, very tiny number actually calculate their carbon emissions or necessarily have a plan to do anything about that. But without further ado, I'll pass on to Lewis now, and we can go into the report findings.
Brilliant, thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Lewis, I'm a researcher here at Icebreaker One, and I'll be your guide today through this research. So we will be publishing our full report on carbon reporting solutions for UK SMEs on March the 18th, but we already wanted to share some of the kind of practical learnings that we've had and some advice also for SMEs that you can take away and hopefully use today. So when we asked SMEs why calculating their business's carbon emissions was important to them, we heard three things. One, help the organization to be more sustainable, which is fairly self-evident. Two, to enable other organizations to assess us, and that's what Gavin was talking about there. And although SMEs are currently not regulated to report, larger enterprise customers or banks may be asking for this information already. So it's kind of critical that that is possible for SMEs to produce this data. And thirdly, helping with decision making. And this can be about sustainability, but it also can be much wider about business transformation. So it can create new opportunities or lead to cost savings. So the first thing we did with this research, if we go on, is really looking at the markets today. And we wanted to see, what's out there and how do we make sense of it. And when we started to do our research, what we found was over 270 different carbon reporting solutions out there, which is frankly quite a lot, and can be very difficult to navigate that if you had a choice of 270 different tools that all do similar things, but maybe slightly different things. So we wanted to essentially make sense of this. And so what we've done is broken down the different types of solutions into 10 types. So if we go on, what we've created here is a bit of a matrix. So here you can see on the left-hand side, 10 different types of solutions categorized as either generalists, so they should be able to be used by any company, specialist tools, which kind of go a bit deeper into a specific either vertical or chain, and reduction tools as well, which of course the whole point of being able to measure something is to be able to manage it and reduce it over time. So I'm just going to very quickly run through the 10 types we see here, but in the report it goes into much more detail about each of these types and provides examples. The first one we have is the web calculator. So web calculators provide a rough estimate of a carbon footprint, typically based on manual input, with total carbon emissions being shared at the end. They're typically free or very low-cost solutions and really give a rough estimate, I would say. Next is carbon accounting, and this really quantifies the carbon emissions from the business operations using financial data. So it's very common that these carbon accounting software sort of integrates into either your bank or your Sages or your Zeros, your books, to give you a very quick and a very broad picture of the business's emissions based off of what you're actually spending. But it might have sort of less depth of accuracy because it's just working on the financial data and not necessarily on the activity that's happening underneath. Next, we have measure manage platforms. So these provide a way to calculate, but then go further and allow you to kind of track and reduce your carbon emissions over time using recommendations. So the big jump here is really that you're tracking over time, and there's much more emphasis on target setting and typically reporting into kind of standards or international frameworks, which again are very important for regulated organizations to be able to point to. Then you have ESG platforms, similar to measure and manage platforms, but obviously their remit is much wider. They're not just focusing on the E for environment, but they're also looking at the social and the governance performance of a company. And then finally, in the generalist bucket, you have consultants who are obviously experts, and they come in and advise on sustainable strategies and how to meet these goals. So they'll go into the nitty-gritty, typically more labor intensive, so more hands-on and more costly, but can do things like supply chain or life cycle analysis of products. If we go into the specialists, then you've got things like product specialists, which are really there to kind of assess and improve carbon footprint on specific products through a life cycle analysis. And they'll go really, really deep into one particular product of the business. And on the flip side of that, you'd have supply chain specialists. So really looking at all of the emissions that may be kind of hidden in scope 3. And scope 3 typically is where kind of 80% of the emissions might be hiding in a business, and it covers a wide variety of topics. There's kind of 15 categories within that scope 3, so there's lots of work to do there. Then finally, you have institutional tools, which are really set up for organizations like banks or asset managers, and they're looking to calculate multiple different organization footprints and aggregate them up. Then we've got the two reduction tools at the end. We've got an engagement platform, which is really looking at kind of informing and empowering internal stakeholders. Typically, that means staff in sustainability efforts. And the final one, carbon offsetting, which is really about kind of compensating for emissions by funding projects that remove or avoid emissions in the first place. So that is a very, very quick run through of the 10 different types of solutions. And when we look at any of those 270 different providers on the market, what you tend to find is that they might do 2 or 3 of these things, not just a single thing. So if we kind of click on again, what we see is a slightly more organized, but many, many logos. But at least that gave us the basis of, okay, there are different discrete categories that we can look at and different companies that will provide these types of services. After this, what we really dug into is how solutions are working. So how do they work in practice, essentially? And if we click on, most to all solutions are using this kind of formula. So the basic formula for calculating carbon emissions is that you take your business data, and that's how much energy is used, how much materials, services you're supplying, how many miles are driven, what you're purchasing. And this data can be either captured through spend-based, so that's the financial spends like the carbon accounting tools, looking at your bank accounts and whatnot, or activity-based, where you're really looking at what's happening in the business. You get that number, or the amalgamation of that, and then you times it by the emission factor. And emission factors are the rate at which a given activity releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So they're also referred to as conversion factors. Sometimes they're referred to as emission intensity or carbon intensity. They have a few names, but they're all doing similar things. And these factors are sourced from a number of different places. They could be international organizations all the way down to kind of commercial or product level emission factors. And essentially, the more granular and the more precise those factors are, the better representation of what's actually going on in your business happens. And so in the end, a more accurate outcome in terms of the carbon report. So by taking these two numbers, you get a carbon report, and you typically get total emissions and a bit of a breakdown of that. And then you also might get recommendations, strategies, target setting, offsetting with that. So if we click on, what we see when we look at the business data is that there's obviously a lot going on in different people's businesses, and every business looks slightly different. So being able to collect it in an effective way is critical. And that typically means automation of both the collection and the processing. So if we look at this chart here, we see that many of the 30 different carbon solutions that we surveyed will allow SMEs or businesses to provide their data through APIs, so in an automated fashion. But you'll also see that typically that will be supplemented by a more manual input. So it could be PDF files or direct entry. If we go on to the next slide and have a look at the emission factors, again, when we surveyed the 30 different carbon reporting solutions, they source their emission factors from a variety of different places. You can see other quite high there. So clearly there's lots of different places that these numbers need to come from in order to reflect the businesses as best possible. But we can also deduce from this that there is no single source for this. Actually, there are many, many databases, and there are growing databases that are getting more accurate and more granular about these things. So if we click on, that's how kind of we end up with the carbon reporting. And then, yeah, again, we might end up with kind of these practical recommendations of how to reduce. And ideally, what you want at the end is not just the number, it's something that you can act upon. So after this in the research, what we then went on to do was really compare the different types of solutions, looking at both price and functionality of the solution. And with the price, it's quite interesting. When we asked SMEs, there was typically some anxiety around how much these platforms can cost. So 73% of SMEs expressed concern about the upfront costs of carbon reporting. I think this is partly due to some of the larger players who often will serve larger enterprises having much higher price tags on their software because they're aimed at more complex businesses. But actually, when we asked the carbon solutions, how much do they cost? There is a range, and there is price points for many different people and many different organizations, from the free all the way up to kind of 15K plus. But there, if we click on again, we can actually see that of those that we surveyed, 41% are £500 or less for an SME. So there are solutions that are affordable. This pricing doesn't count or include the amount of labor costs that might go into actually calculating your carbon emissions. But when we surveyed the SMEs, 80% of them responded that it took them 8 hours or less to actually go and collect the data, process it, get some results from these platforms. So you're typically looking at a day's amount of work included with this. So if we click on to the next one, we've compared 3 different solutions here. And I guess the point we're trying to make with this is that you somewhat pay for what you get. So if you look here, we've got a web calculator from the Carbon Trust, carbon accounting platform from Sage, and measure and manage platform with a kind of added component of carbon removal from watersheds. And as you kind of go up in price point, you get more granular emissions factors, you get a wider coverage of scope, which again, the scope 3 stuff is really critical to make sure that that's included. And the data inputs and methods used typically become easier and more automated as we go up the chain. But there is still, when you get into it, there's still manual work needed at the very top. And so when we kind of think about different sizes of businesses, we can start to kind of make a one-for-one or try to make some recommendations or suggestions as to where to start. So if you are, say, a micro business, if you're that kind of a sole trader, or you're 1 to 9 staff, maybe all you need is a kind of very practical, lightweight tool that's kind of cost effective and will show you a rough estimate and highlight some hotspots. And that's what you need to take action. And if you're a small business of kind of 10 to 50 staff, maybe you need to do that more quickly and in an automated way so that you could do it every single year without too much staff involvement. And so you would use something like a carbon accounting platform. And if you're a medium-sized business, you may have customers, or you may have loans or kind of enterprise businesses that are requiring you to meet certain standards or certain frameworks. You might need a more robust solution. So looking at more measure and manage platforms. Next, we're going to talk a bit more about the challenges. So what we heard from both the SMEs as well as the solutions, but really the challenges that we heard again and again, if we click on from the SME perspective, is about this data collection and accuracy. And obviously that's going to change depending on the tools you're using, but it, as you can see in this pie chart, really outstrips the kind of engagement, knowledge, or time factors. So people in these small businesses could start, but very quickly the kind of data collection and accuracy part became the difficult part to overcome. If we click on, when we surveyed SMEs, there's a real spread in terms of the difficulty that they found. And I think that's somewhat reflective of the different tools in use by these different organizations. So some are very automated and can take 5 minutes, where some are much more labor intensive, and you will end up doing a lot more running around the silos in your business to make sure that you're covering everything off. We look at the kind of accuracy part of the puzzle. Because of the way in which carbon emissions are calculated, there are many, many variables. So you have variables in the emission factors used, and then you have variables in terms of how much coverage you're getting with the business data. And what this can lead to is a huge spread of results. So even if you had the same business using 5 or 10 different tools, you might get something different from them. So here you can see 300% variation between 17 different solutions from one study. And the quote here, we collected over 7,000 reports, tried to compare them, but it's like comparing apples and oranges. It's very different, as there's many different standards out there, but that means that there are different ways in which to navigate this operation for the business. However, there are some solutions in the pipeline and already alive. So there are 3 that we identified, but we identify many more in the final report, which will be published in March. The first one, we saw a growth of tools that focus only on one industry, so they can be much more specific about capturing the business data that's very reflective of that business and applying more precise emission factors, so really getting into the granular data. There is a growth in supply chain focused solutions, so again, which are helping to kind of unpack that 70–80% of emissions which are associated with scope 3. And finally, there are kind of whole of market solutions like Perseus, which is a program convened by Icebreaker One and Bankers for Net Zero. And that's really aimed at enabling automated emissions reporting for every SME in the UK, which we may hear about a bit later. So with all this, we kind of wanted to put together some, I guess, things to look out for, some questions that SMEs should really be asking of vendors when they're going out to the market, and also kind of a checklist of recommendations. On the checklist, we have 8 questions, ranging, but really looking at the data side of things, the transparency side of things, and what it will enable you and your business to do. So are all carbon emission scopes covered by the solution, especially looking at scope 3? Do emission factors closely reflect your business's operations? How much automation is in place, and what's the time commitment? I think it's good to have that clear up front. Can you download the results and take or share them elsewhere? And this idea of kind of data portability is really important when you have lots of different stakeholders perhaps asking you for this type of information. Is it easy enough to keep sharing on and on? How transparent is the solution in terms of the accuracy it can produce? So I don't think any solution on the market can be 100% accurate, but it's good to know how accurate they can be and what their transparency is on the kind of the amount or the spread that they might give you. Which standards or frameworks does the solution align to? We haven't gone into a huge amount of depth in the kind of standards and frameworks because there are many out there, but it's good to understand what solutions are aligning to which of these frameworks. Does the solution give insights and advice on how to reduce emissions? Again, that's why we're calculating, why we're doing all of this, is to make sure that we can actually action the findings. And finally, what else can the solution offer to help you reduce your emissions? So this might be an engagement piece, or it might be an offsetting piece, but it's good to know what else the platforms can provide. So finally, some SME recommendations from the report. We would suggest that SMEs consider factors other than costs when looking at purchasing or using one of these tools. Should leverage free calculators. They're free, they're very quick to use to kind of get an initial estimate, but use that as a basis to get more advanced in your thinking and your knowledge. Should supplement automated data with manual inputs wherever possible. I think automation is always great and it's quick and can be simple, but it won't give the full picture yet. Engage staff and validate assumptions. This is a good way to get into your organization and get buy-in from the team. And finally, share emissions and reduction plans openly, either with your customers or with your suppliers. And there's a lot of kind of green hushing going on at the minute, but it's important that there are leading organizations that are confident to kind of say, we are making progress in this, and no, it might not be perfect, but everyone needs to kind of start their journey and accelerate their journey. So there was a lot of information in that. We will, as I said, publish the full report in March on the 18th. And there'll be much more information also for kind of carbon reporting solutions and other institutions in that. But what I've shared today is kind of a real focus on the SME side of things. So to give you a kind of chance to stop listening to my voice and to have a think, we're going to run 3 more quick poll questions, which Caroline is going to hopefully pop up on the screen in a moment. There we go. So the first one, what do you need to progress? And you can pick multiple answers here. I'll give you a minute to all input into that. So we're already getting a few on the best advice for solutions. Third-party comparisons seem to be the top 2 answers, but there's, yeah, access to granular data kind of coming in third here. Just do another 20 seconds so anyone who's not input can do. And then we can end that poll and go on to the next question. I think our top 2 answers there were unbiased advice and third-party comparisons, which is really interesting. So if we go on to the next question, what's your confidence in the market? How do you feel going out and purchasing a solution and making sure that you feel like you will get what you need from it? Somewhat confident seems to be winning out. Few not confidence. Nobody's yet very confident. another 10 seconds and then we'll move on to the last one. Yeah, I think we're aligned on being somewhat confident in navigating. So there is more work to be done. We'll get the final poll up. This is more of a selfish one for us, but just to understand if this research is useful. Obviously, we want to spread it as far as possible, but we want to make sure that we've got the right information in front of us. Well, that's good. We've got a good alignment there on the research being very useful. So I think we'll end it there before someone says it's not useful. And we will move on to our bit of a panel discussion, but also I really want to open up the floor for kind of Q&As from anyone in the room, and you can either do that by chatting in the chat function or just out loud. But before I do that, I'll introduce our two panelists. So today we have Ian O'Donnell, who runs multiple businesses and is also a non-exec director from the Federation of Small Businesses. And we have Gavin, again, from Icebreaker One, rejoining us to discuss some of the findings, and they might also answer some of the questions that you have. I guess to start off the conversation, maybe I'll ask Ian first. What's the kind of one piece of advice or takeaway for an SME today?
I think the big challenge with this is often you look at it and you go, it's so confusing. There's so many options. And the easy option, bearing in mind that the challenging years we've just had, is to do nothing at all because you're just not sure where to start. And my key piece of advice is, pick something, get started, because the sooner you get started, the sooner you learn. And the sooner you at least start collecting some information, the better able you are to inform your supply chain, that those who largely for SMEs are supporting up the supply chain of where you are and what your plans are for the future, because that's the key thing they're going to want to know.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's very concise. Get started, get the ball rolling. Gavin, anything to add?
Yeah, I'd echo that. And, I was surprised by how many solutions there are out in the market. When we started this, I thought we'd get over 100. I didn't think we'd get to nearly 300. And I'm sure there's others out there that we haven't found as well. I think that points to a few things. One is when we look back to when there was another sort of bubble around carbon reporting, going back when the Climate Change Act was first published, suddenly there were hundreds of little carbon accounting and carbon reporting tools, and a few years later there were 10, and here we are again. Now it's becoming regulated. It's got much more teeth to it, but it's still just as confusing as it ever was. So I think to reinforce Ian's point, understanding where to begin and how to start and what all the acronyms mean is extremely, it's a barrier to entry, especially when you've got no time or money to do anything. So the challenge there around beginning is a big one. And just to touch on Perseus there's a question in the chat about challenges of interoperability of data models, metrics, and methodologies. Welcome to our world, Ben. This is what we're trying to address. It is very much around how can we get implementation alignment between different organizations who are trying to measure things, and to draw on this program where we're pulling together the UK banks, SME community, and carbon reporting tools, is can we all align around applying a standard and a methodology and the metrics in the same way so that we end up with comparable data? So it's a massive challenge. everyone's doing things slightly differently. So you don't have comparability. And if you don't have comparability, you can't really benchmark where you are. And that stops you knowing really what to do next. However, that shouldn't get in the way of starting to do something. We've got to start. I quite often hear, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, which is something we strongly believe in. But I'd say we're not good yet for a lot of this.
And just to add on that, one of the key things that other areas that I'm involved in is with the UK accreditation service. I think this is an area where there's a massive need for standards to come into play, so that when you pick a carbon accounting tool, you go, yeah, this data has some level of authority to what you're going to get out of the end product. At the moment, you really don't know what maths is happening behind the scenes on the various tools. When you've got 300% variation, you can understand why an SME goes, well, if I've got, I've tried 2 or 3 tools, I've got such variation, well, what do I choose? You can see why they then just give up and go away. So there is a real need here for, A, how do we get good data? And B, how do we make sure the maths that's happening behind the scenes is good quality? And, this is definitely an area where standards are needed.
Yep. Thank you for the question, Ben. Chris has got another interesting point in the chat around the 270 reporting organizations surviving based on historical patterns and carbon reporting, which I think is a very good flag there. And in terms of how they're financed and how risky it is choosing one over another. I don't know, Gavin or Ian, whether you want to kind of speak to the future of the landscape.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a bit linked to the experience you're describing from some time ago. I mean, the Climate Change Act passed over a decade ago. The funding models behind a lot of these things are a lot of private sector companies coming into the space. A lot of very well-established companies in the space have been doing this for many, many years. They charge on a either software as a service basis or on a consultancy basis, kind of one-off basis. There's also other tools in the market that have been mentioned. There's the Carbon Trust have a range of things. The Broadway initiative as well has a what's the name of the hub there? SME Climate Hub, is it? So there's a range of free tools and there's a range of paid for tools. And I think here part of the challenge is, yes, there'll be either consolidation as some of those organizations get rolled up, or there will be, some of them will go away. But equally, some of them are highly well funded with venture backing. And I think that's both a good thing and something just to be aware of, is that when you see venture money flowing into any space, it means that someone's worked out there's a huge amount of money to be made out of data aggregation and aggregate insights. And so that raises a lot of questions around, do the actors here, what's their core business model? Is it to provide insights to you, or is it to exit? And like I say, I've run venture-backed things myself before, and there's always sort of tensions within that. Ultimately, what we want to do is drive towards the consolidated cohesion, I'd say, across the market, of saying, can we just do this, the baselining, the kind of core footprinting, even though the results might not be comparable to begin with. We're moving quickly with programs like Perseus to try and create that consolidation, and have the competition really happen on the analytics. And so I'd look to companies who are really doubling down on what are the interventions that you can make. These are the things you want to know as a business as well. How much is it going to cost me, and what do I have to do in order to get on the journey to net zero, rather than what is my footprint. So there's a kind of maturity and sequencing piece there. I can see some questions coming in on the chat. Chris, does that answer your question around the patterns in carbon reporting? Yeah, great. So questions here. How we're going to get access to the reports, I can address that. Will be on the website. We'll post it on social media, and our partners like FSB and British Business Bank will be posting it out as well. Lewis, do you want me to just go through the questions here?
Yeah, we've got, does your report evaluate how open the methodology is? So partly we did survey 30 different solution providers and asked them what their methodologies were, and they were open about how they did things. I would say that's not maybe a reflection of the entire market. Sometimes it's a bit opaque and black boxy, where you don't entirely know what's going on underneath. But typically leading solutions will be very transparent about what their methodologies are and what they align to. So it's a good indicator of a good provider.
Just to come in on that, one of the things I would look for in a carbon accounting solution is when it's giving me my end numbers, I want it to tell me how it's. So if I've done 20 train journeys, I want it to tell me in the sort of detail how it's calculated, what number it's put as carbon per mile for those train journeys, because then you get an idea, and this allows you then to move data more readily, because you've got the data you're putting in, you've got the numbers it's done that data calculation on, and you can then get an idea why you're getting a different number from this solution compared to that solution, because actually it's the train journeys that are skewing because they're using a figure of this and this one's using a figure of that. It also, I mean, train journeys I'm picking on because it illustrates a prime point where most carbon calculating tools will do a mass assumption. But obviously, if I travel on a Vanti from London to Birmingham, electric train journey, that is a very different carbon calculation to if I travel on cross country for a similar journey, because that's a diesel engine. So, just goes to show actually significant assumptions are being made still at this stage, because we don't have what we hope Gavin and his team will eventually bring, where every purchase we're making will have a carbon number data accurate attached to it, which can just feed into an automated system. And that, to be honest, will be the holy grail of obviously of all of this.
Yeah, I think it's a really important one, and it highlights the complexity of how all of this stuff comes together. So just to help give a lens on that, you've got supranational bodies like the IPCC saying here is a problem, government policy saying we must do a thing about the problem, and then global standards bodies like the ISSB, International Sustainability Standards Board, that say do this kind of thing. And then you've got specific standards like PCAF, which is used in the banking sector, that says do this in the banking sector. But then they point at things like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol says this is how to do a calculation for electricity in the UK on a Tuesday. And then you get to the implementation of that in the commercial sector, and then everybody uses a different methodology. So unless you've got the transparency through the chain of which standards being used, which frameworks being used, which reporting standard and so on, you don't end up with comparability. And that's what we're trying to pull together with programs like with Perseus. Is the word standard means a different thing to about 12 different people in the value chain. So that's going to be I think a critical factor going forwards. We've got accounting practices in finance. The process has to be transparent. The way that the calculations are done has to be transparent, and the output reporting data has to be transparent. But the input data is highly confidential. You don't publish your list of suppliers if you're a large organization, because you'll break lots of other rules. So on the next question, I think, was how long before regulations actually kick in, and who benchmark and how benchmark leaders can be in the market. So the regulations already here for large organizations. So the banks have mandatory reporting. If you're over a certain size of organization, you have mandatory reporting. The impact of that is that those large companies are turning around to their own supply chains and saying, can you give us your data? So there's a secondary impact on the SME community, even though the SMEs are not regulated, their customers are. And that when you look at some of the standards, that are being regulated, they are including what's called Scope 3. Scope 3 includes your supply chain. And so there's a mandatory requirement on, for example, the banks to say you must report on your customers. And obviously the bank's customers are the SMEs, or include the SMEs. So it's kind of now is the short answer. And the benchmarking piece, there are different reporting places, if you like, that are aggregating information, like CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project, who are developing SME questionnaires and so on. But again, that feels very onerous right now for the SME community. So we need better ways of being able to do that, and all the comparability questions we've just talked to. Next question on Just Get Started. Potentially a free service. Do you have any advice on how to use these less accurate results to help identify a more accurate solution that is better for my organization? That's a really good question. I think if you use the free calculators, it'll give you a sense of where your biggest impact might be. So it's usually energy or heating or cooling. In agriculture, obviously, there's a whole range of complexity around soil and weather and so on. But heating and cooling are usually the biggest ones in any kind of fixed business. Transport is then a big one. You'll find that if you are flying a lot, just stopping flying and doing a video call instead will radically reduce your footprint. And then when you look at those, if you're quite an energy intensive business, for example, working out what the impact would be of installing renewables or switching tariffs, etc., is part of the mix. Back to you, Lewis.
Thanks. So where are we? I don't know, Ian, if you have anything else to add on to that kind of.
Just to add on to that, sort of, using the free tools again, when you get that free tool, it just helps you think through what are the various areas I need to think about. It's one of the benefits of trying, if you can find a free tool that's aligned to your business sector or to your business type, certainly it helps, because they're more likely to have headings which are more closely aligned with what you expect to find and see. It also allows you, when you spot a big number, then go into how this is why it's so important to know how that number is derived, because if, for example, travel is a large part of your number, then making sure that if that's a significant part, you need to be really accurate in that bit. So therefore, you need to choose a tool which perhaps allows greater granularity, more accuracy around travel. So my own business, consultancy business, we all work from home. We have no fixed office. We have no fixed heating. Travel is by far and away our biggest carbon cost as a business. That and our IT usage. And it's amazing how many businesses forget that their computers are using power, that their data center in the cloud is using power, what all of those cloud services are. So yeah, finding a tool that aligns to your type of business and making sure that you therefore can, when there's something that comes up as one of the bigger numbers, you've got the ability to deep dive and make sure that that tool is sort of producing the accuracy that you'd want.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, so we've got kind of align it with the business, find those hotspots with the free or low cost tools, and then make sure to get precision in those hotspots. We've got a couple more questions and comments in the chat. You mentioned that there's already more than 300 solutions. Are those solutions aligned with ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards? I can say no, they are not all aligned yet, but I think as the market matures and maybe somewhat consolidates, I would expect to see more of those things happening. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything onto that point.
Yeah, just to add, alignment with, and really you can insert acronym of your choice at that point, is something that needs a lot more work. Most solutions will say on their websites, we are aligned with, and then they'll list out all the acronyms. One, it's not clear what alignment means. You know, they may well be aligned, and also that's a responsibility of the standards bodies, because quite often the standards bodies say, well, this thing over here is good enough, and that thing over there would be better. So you can easily be aligned with not very good, and you can easily be aligned with very good. So it's just confusing, I think, right? But that's the kind of core thing here is lots of vendors, everyone's confused. I've been working in this space for nearly 20 years. I'm confused by the number of acronyms and struggle to track it all. There's a page on the website on icebreaker1.org/ecosystem where we've been trying to map this out and track some of it. I've just noticed it's probably out of date because it's been 3 months since we last updated it, because the standards themselves have been consolidating. So TCF, what was TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, is now wrapped into the ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board, and already I can feel that we've lost the room with acronym soup. So, but I think, you know, very linked to this is the sort of next question as well of like, once you've done this for carbon, what next? Well, carbon includes water. There are carbon impact of water is one of the things that exists. But more broadly, what's happening is, yes, biodiversity, nature-related. There's now a thing called TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And depending on which camp you're in, that might either subsume carbon or be subsumed by carbon or be a separate thing. But we'll leave that up to other people to discuss what the right structure is. But when we think about just how hard carbon is, thinking about nature-related and broader ecosystems services, which is kind of what's being codified here, we're at the beginning of a journey.
And it's worth remembering that some of those are already coming in and regulated as well. So, for example, if you're a house builder, you know, new regulation just come in around biodiversity net gain on a housing development project. And, you know, again, you've got exactly the same system coming where either you do it as part of the development, or you can buy in exactly the same way as you buy carbon credits. You can buy credits around environmental impact by buying landscape that's been turned into a meadow somewhere else. So it just goes to show this is coming. And this is one of the things I would say, that yes, it's great looking at tools. Yes, it's great looking at data. Mindset and ethos within the business is going to be vital. We've got to just start developing a mindset which says, as a business, what is our overall environmental impact? How are we measuring that? How are we setting goals and plans in place for that? Has just got to become part of business as usual for all organizations. Challenging, but that is definitely, you know, the regulation is coming in. Most of this whole area will be regulated within the next 5 years. We need to be ready for it. Otherwise, we're going to be desperately playing catch up.
Yeah. So I think that it's a really salient set of points, Ian. The good news is that things are moving, you know, and that we will move to a more sustainable future. Personally, I think we're still quite some distance away from net zero, but closer to zero is certainly going to happen. The good news for businesses going through this process will also reveal efficiencies in your own business operations, and that will save you money, and ultimately will save you time and money. So as well as producing obviously better products and services at the end. The tough journey that we're all on at the moment is it's so messy, and we're not quite sure exactly which thing's going to land first. However, as Ian was saying, it's already regulated at the high end. It's really a question of when, not if, that hits us. And the kind of transition that we're in the middle of is to treat, let's call it broadly, environmental reporting with the same level of accuracy as we do with financial reporting. That's the kind of journey we're on. We've got a couple of minutes left. I just want to touch on one other question that I've received about what gets funded by VCs, interestingly, like what kind of venture investment would make sense. well, there's a lot of software as a service type businesses out there that you could draw comparisons with things like in the US when Sarbanes-Oxley was introduced, there was a huge kind of gold rush around codifying, systematizing all of that. And I think the fact that we've got nearly 300 organizations on the map here shows that there's quite a gold rush of, well, let's create value as well, like economic value, as well as providing services out to the market. Where I'd focus as a VC is a different conversation. But can follow up on that.
Thanks.
Lewis.
We're just gonna share some final call to actions in the last minute. So you'll be able to find the full report when it's published on this link here, and you can also scan it with your QR code. If you want to contribute or connect, you can reach out at research@ib1.org. And there's also further SME resources at the businessclimatehub.uk. Any final words from anyone to wrap up the session today?
Just get and do it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for coming and joining us and learning a bit about the research. And yeah, hope to connect going forward.